Welcome to POTUS 2017, where we keep watch on the Oval Office and pour cold, hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. The President of the United States is in double trouble. First, the Washington Post reported that during last week's White House meeting with the Russian ambassador and foreign minister, President Trump spontaneously shared some highly classified information about ISIS that it was later learned Israel had obtained from sources that might now be compromised. The president admitted this, but said it was important for national security. Then another shocker, this one nearer impeachment territory. The New York Times reported that back on Valentine's Day, the president asked then FBI Director James Comey to back off on investigating Michael Flynn. This the day after Flynn had to resign as National Security Advisor for lying to the vice president about his Russia contacts. The White House denies the Times version of events, but turns out shortly after that meeting, Director Comey wrote down what was said. Comey's memo, if the New York Times has it right, reports that Trump told Comey, quote, "I hope you can let this go." In the weeks following, the FBI director did not ingratiate himself to the president. He disputed Trump's baseless claim that President Obama had wiretapped him, and Comey testified that he was mildly nauseated by the idea he might have affected the outcome of the election by briefly launching the Clinton email investigation again in October. Comey was getting a lot of attention.
Oh, and there's Jim. Will you please? He's become more famous than me.
Trump fired Director Comey May 9th, nearly 3 months after their one-on-one talk on Valentine's Day. Today, what's the effect of this scandal on the military, vets as we head toward Memorial Day, and those on active duty and overseas? Plus, we'll look at a study that predicts Trump Care's future from the fate of Romney Care. With us here in New York is Paul Rieckhoff, writer, founder, and CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Paul Rieckhoff, let me start with you. The commander-in-chief is being suspected of all these things. How does it affect the troops? How do you think your veterans from Iraq and Afghanistan are reacting?
I think it's an important question that you ask because not many folks are asking that. I mean, there's tremendous instability. There's a lack of trust. Everybody in America wakes up and says, I don't know what's going to happen today. Imagine if you're in Afghanistan. Imagine if you're a soldier at the 82nd Airborne or you're a Navy SEAL. You don't know what country we're going to get in an argument with. You don't know what country we're going to talk about fighting with. And at the same time, troops are dying in places like Somalia, where most of America is not really tracking or even understanding that we've got troops at war. So I think there's a real sense of instability, and that's bad for our military. It's bad for recruiting. It's bad for the Pentagon that's trying to forward plan operations. And I think overall the trust that the military has with our civilian leadership. On the other side of things, we've got an expertise around classified information, about secret intel, and to hear that the president may have violated that sacred compact on the same day, ironically, when Chelsea Manning is being released from prison, after spending, I think, 7 years in jail, I think it sets a real precedent here. You know, if lower enlisted are going to be held to this standard for disclosing confidential information, and our president does something similar, what does that mean? Does it mean there's a different standard for our civilian leadership than there is for our military? I think these are important questions that get lost because so few people are serving in the military nowadays and because our civilian population is so disconnected from the realities and costs of war.
As various things have been revealed about Trump since the inauguration, his popularity with those who voted for him and Republicans in general has actually remained pretty steady. Now, he did very well among veterans. Do you have a sense from comments pages or Facebook or anything? You have hundreds of thousands of members in the Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. If whether, in your constituency, he's starting to lose support?
I think the veteran population, which is about 22 million people, is in many ways reflective of the general population. You see about 2/3 of veterans voted for Trump, but a disproportionate number of older veterans are white, conservative men. So I think that's reflective of his core demographic in many ways. So people who were with him before in the civilian population are probably still with him in the military. I think there's a higher level of skepticism within our generation of all politicians. They tend to be more independent. They tend to be less partisan, and I think they're frustrated with civilian leadership in general. You know, we dealt with Iraq. We don't have a clear strategy on Afghanistan. We don't know what's next. So I think the veteran population can be a voice of conscience. They also understand defense and military issues in a way the civilian population doesn't, so they're translators. So I look to the military writers. I look to the military voices on social media and Twitter, and even the voices you can hear, you know, trickling out of overseas are going to be exceptionally important because they have that nuanced understanding. But, you know, they also consider themselves in some ways a different kind of citizenry. They've been asked to sacrifice over and over again for a decade and a half. So for us, we feel like we've got more skin in the game. And I think that creates an important and sometimes effective civil backstop that exists within the veterans population.
And that leads, I think, to the plan that the president is now considering to add more troops to Afghanistan. We've got, what, about 8,400 there presently. It used to be many tens of thousands, but that war's been going on since 2001.
Yeah.
How do the vets who fought in Afghanistan, if you can generalize at all, feel about, A, the fact that we're still there at all, and B, the prospect of another troop surge?
I think on a very basic level, you know, we've started to call Afghanistan Forgotistan. We feel like it's ebbed and flowed, but America's kind of forgotten about it. Forgotten our friends are over there, forgotten our friends are dying, and I think that's a very dangerous place for our country to be in. When it comes to the actual strategy, there doesn't seem to be one. We don't know why we're going. We don't know when we'll be done. We don't know what to tell our families. And that's been the case now for a decade and a half. So I think for our members especially, what they want people to understand is there's been a churn. We're tired. You know, we've got friends and members who've done 9, 10 tours. The Special Forces community in particular has been really ground into the ground and asked over and over to go. And it's hard to fight to win when you don't know where the goal line is. And I think that's become really a core feeling for our generation of veterans that we've got to find ways to grapple with.
And what about that social backstop that you mentioned? That's different than in previous wars, right?
Yeah, there's no draft, right? So, you know, people don't think their kids are going to go. If he says, yeah, you know, we might send some troops into Syria, or we talk about North Korea, you know, it's somebody else's kids going. That's unprecedented. We're less than 0.5% of the population. So you've got essentially a warrior class that's been shouldering this unimaginable burden and continues to shoulder it over and over. The folks in our office, we say, yeah, you know, jokingly, oh, maybe we'll all see each other in Korea. It's not that much of a joke nowadays. It could actually happen, and that's a reality for us that's really stark compared to the rest of the population that's not in the National Guard, not in the Reserve, and has no real threat of draft. So I think it's been good for our military to have this professionalized military. They're the best on the planet. We all know how fantastic they are, but it's been bad for our democracy. When you can wage war and the citizenry, for the most part, doesn't really have any personal consequence, that's a bad place for our country to be, especially if we're in never-ending war.
With these two revelations about Trump sharing this intel with the Russians, classified intel, and the Comey claim that Trump asked him to not investigate Michael Flynn, Paul Ryan, let me play a clip of Paul Ryan, asked if it's time now for either an independent commission or independent counsel, as the Democrats want.
We need the facts. It is obvious there are some people out there who want to harm the president, but we have an obligation to carry out our oversight regardless of which party is in the White House. And that means before rushing to judgment, we get all the pertinent information. The House Oversight and Government Reform Committee has appropriately requested this memo, and I'm sure we're going to want to hear from Mr. Comey about why, if this happens as he allegedly describes, why he didn't take action at the time.
So, Paul, do you have an opinion about this, either as a private citizen or as head of the IAVA?
I think it's crazy. I mean, that's kind of where everybody is right now. You wake up every morning, you don't know what's going to happen. I think that's what bothers me as a citizen. There seems to be no clarity. Everything's reactive. We're missing the big things, right? We can't even talk about infrastructure or veterans care because every hearing gets disrupted every day. We have important hearings in the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee last week that were canceled, that were rescheduled. So we can't get things done. I think that's what concerns me the most, is that this is not just a distraction. It's become a black hole that's sucking our government down. In our community, I think we look for hope and we look for leadership. And I think people have been inspired by General Mattis, our Secretary of Defense. He's a guy who really has trust and credibility across partisan aisles. I think many people feel like he's a voice of reason and he's a voice of experience when you've got so many newcomers to Washington that don't know how the machine works. So
how about McMaster in that respect,
yeah, I mean,
and compared to
McMaster,
Flynn, the original national security advisor?
McMaster is very well respected and very well regarded. I think for me personally, I watched some of the coverage this morning. I'm bothered by how the media and civilian population seem to think that every general is just going to be a loyal soldier, that he's got to go out there and carry water for the president. He's got to because he's a soldier. McMaster is a brilliant guy. Mattis is a philosopher. These are thinking, objective, critical, responsible people. And because they were in the military does not mean that they're just going to march in lockstep with a wrong if it happens to be.
And do you care, or are you surprised that McMaster was sent out the other day to be the apologist for Trump rather than Sean Spicer or somebody? Does that compromise his credibility?
I think it could. I think this is a playbook Trump has used before. Trump knows that the military has tremendous credibility. The veterans community is maybe the ultimate populist issue. So you've seen frequently when Trump gets backed into a political corner, he pivots into the military. He talks about doing a fundraiser for veterans in Iowa instead of doing a debate. He knows it works. Now, that puts McMaster's obviously in a difficult position. I don't know if it worked. You can't call that play too many times before people understand what you're doing. Yeah. So, I don't think McMaster convinced too many people, and I would be interested to hear what he'd say off the record like everyone else. But you can't keep throwing these generals out in front. Eventually, it looks like a political prop.
A lot of people thought the Trump campaign was going to be toast very early on in the summer of 2015 when he insulted John McCain in the way that he did. He's only a hero because he was captured. I prefer people who weren't captured. That seems to insult all POWs, and yet, as you were indicating before, the Vietnam generation, McCain generation of veterans was very much behind Trump. Why did he maintain that credibility even after saying that? Why did people think that he got veterans issues better than Hillary Clinton? And is he doing anything now that he's actually in office?
I think some people thought that, and very simply because he said it all the time. Republicans say all the time, we're strong in national defense, we're strong in national defense. It's a talking point. So eventually it seeps in and people say Republicans are strong in national defense. How do you know? Because they say it all the time. The president said repeatedly he supports our veterans, he supports our military. In the Pentagon, there is a real feeling that they've got a president who's going to support them from a financial standpoint. They feel like they will have an increased budget. They'll have some level of predictability, especially after sequester. That's important. I think it's important to also understand VA and DOD, Department of Defense, are really the only places that saw a budget increase. Other budgets are being decimated. So whether that's a real commitment to defense and veterans or it's smart political optics, it is a reality. But the points on the board are not there yet. The VA is not fixed. There's no hotline at the White House. A lot of these big promises that Trump has talked about in the campaign trail have so far not happened. And I hope it's an area where people hold him accountable because it was big talk and a lot of it was political. He knew it would engender tremendous support. And if he doesn't deliver it, it should be a real vulnerability for him.
Are the scandals getting in the way of delivering on the ground for vets?
Oh, scandals are getting in the way of everything. I mean, we want to try to get VA reform of the disability process. We want to expand care for women veterans. We're pushing a bill right now that's very important called the Deborah Sampson Act that would support and recognize women veterans. All that's getting disrupted. They can't get anything done. And I think even more alarming, what are we going to do if we have a legitimate external defense threat that's consistent or that's really aggressive? I mean, how are we going to be nimble enough to respond? I think that as a military planner and a political analyst, that's what concerns me the most, is that America's stuck in the mud and we can't get anything done to even defend ourselves.
That must be a concern to people in the military who understand what it's like to be in the middle of a real crisis. We haven't had a real national crisis, like a terrorist attack or something like that, since Trump became president. If he's having trouble managing the White House politics day to day, what's going to happen when something really serious happens?
I think it's terrifying. I mean, it also impacts recruiting, right? It impacts retention. Do you want to stay in? I think it does. We'll see over time. But I think, do folks want to join a military where you don't know what's going to happen next? Do you want to stay in a military when you can't predict? And the Pentagon in particular has endured a lot of murkiness for the last few years. They haven't had a predictable budget, and they have been under tremendous pressure to try to reduce their budget, constrict their budget, and try to fight multiple-pronged wars without just budget certainty. So every time I go to the Pentagon, what I hear from them is they want certainty. They want some kind of clarity so they can predict at least a year or two ahead, and they haven't had that in over 5 years.
That's what business leaders want too. They
Absolutely.
want predictability.
Yeah.
They want to know the investment climate, the rules,
And they want
taxes.
stability.
That's maybe why the stock market just plunged. The Dow went down 300
Yeah,
points.
you want stability. What we learned about in the military is command climate, right? With Obama, you could criticize him, but he was calm, right? There was a sense of cool. There was a sense of measurement, right? With this, it's up and down every day. It's volatile. It's emotional.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's good for the economy. I don't think it's good for our military either.
Tell us more, as we head toward Memorial Day, about this Deborah Sampson Act.
So this is really an important time for our country in the way we take care of veterans. But in particular, we have to recognize that 20% of the people who fought since 9/11 are women. 85% of our members felt they are not recognized by this country as veterans. That should be alarming to everyone. They're fighting, they're dying, and they're not even being recognized. So IAVA worked very hard to create the most comprehensive piece of women veterans legislation called the Deborah Sampson Act that we introduced in the Senate a few months ago and in the House today. It was named after a Revolutionary War veteran named Deborah Sampson, who had to disguise herself as a man to fight overseas. She never got the care that she deserved. So this is designed to empower the VA to support these women. It's got resources for women's health care counseling, for increases in hiring, and it also changes the VA motto, which is a very important symbolic thing. If you walk into a VA hospital right now, there's an Abraham Lincoln quote from his second inaugural. It says, "For him and for his widow and for his orphan." Him. His. It excludes women. It makes them feel unwelcome every time they walk through a door.
Do you have a replacement phrase?
We don't, and we're actually not going to be that presumptuous. We want to say, the president and the VA secretary should come up with something new and have a national campaign to find out what the best idea is, come up with something that the veterans community will support across all gender lines, but this has to change. Every time a woman walks into a VA hospital, she's pushed back by that motto, and it can help transform the culture so that we can address the largest growing population of veterans. As older vets die off, women are becoming more and more an essential part of who the VA serves.
Last thing, new news. Any reaction to Trump staying in the Iran nuclear deal, but imposing new sanctions on Iran for other things that they're doing? Did you even hear this breaking news yet?
No, I mean, I haven't heard. I mean, again, it's instability, right? So I'm sure there are, folks in our membership saying, okay, so where are we going next? Iran, I think, is in particular, it demands attention because we know of Iran's interventions in Iraq. EFPs and other projectiles that have flowed into Iraq have been very, very significant. They've been high casualty producing. So I think all of us who've been in Iraq, who've been in the Middle East, know that Iran's a player, and we want to know that there's some kind of stability and predictability there as well. And I think that's an example of what's been neglected. It doesn't seem like America's focusing on Iran right now because we're focusing on scandal every day. And I think that's my immediate reaction. There may be 3 more news stories before this airs. But again, this is our new normal. And I think that's really troubling.
Paul Rieckhoff, founder and CEO of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian.
Time for evidence-based politics, where we pour cold, hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. The Republicans have come a long way in the epic battle to repeal and replace Obamacare. Now there's some legislation that may make it through the Senate if it's not derailed by the latest scandals that passed the House. Why such a rocky start on health care? Obamacare had gained support, and of course, as the president said months ago,
Unbelievably complex subject. Nobody knew that healthcare could be so complicated.
well, not nobody. People who follow this issue know that Trump Care evolved from Ryan Care to replace Obamacare, which ironically was modeled after Romney Care. In 2006, the state of Massachusetts passed a universal health care bill that then became the model for what the president tried to do in 2009 and 2010. Just like Obamacare, the system in Massachusetts expanded Medicaid and set up an exchange market and a mandate that everyone be insured. But a new study finds the Massachusetts system left many people unwilling to pay the high premiums, which were only partially subsidized. Sound familiar? Is this a cautionary tale about what might befall Trump Care nationally? Joining us, One of the authors of the study, Mark Shepard, he is professor of public policy at the Harvard University Kennedy School of Government and joins us via Skype from Cambridge,
Massachusetts.
Massachusetts.
Thanks for having me.
Professor, thanks for coming on. Hi.
Thanks for having me.
So there's been no Romney Care since Obamacare got passed in 2010 because it got folded into the national system. Why did you study it now?
Romney Care was set up created something of a natural experiment. Romney Care was set up to get evidence something of a natural what might happen that we could study to get evidence about what might happen under things like Romney Care was set up in 2006. When Romney Care was set up in 2006, policy that was very similar to what we have in the Affordable Care Act today. Policy that was very similar to what we have in the Affordable Care Act today. They subsidized health insurance for low-income families. Bins of income. But the way that they did it was to create amounts of income money that the government covered for insurance. The amount of varied within money that the government covered for insurance. So as a result, varied within those there were thresholds that were created. So as a result, levels of income. There were thresholds that were created people on either side of income at which very different on either side of the threshold. So someone who was very different amounts for $40,000. So someone who was earning, say, might get $40,000 a year, just below that, earning just above that amount might have to pay something like $40 just above that amount might have to pay. And we could study that natural experiment to get a sense of how much study that natural experiment to get a sense of how much deterred them from families to pay more for insurance deterred them from enrolling in coverage.
So do you think the lessons from that natural experiment were not learned by Obamacare because so many people turned out unwilling to buy insurance despite the subsidies?
If Obamacare was trying to get to universal coverage, if Obamacare was trying to get into universal coverage, there's still about 9% of the population that lacks insurance. There's still about 9% of the population that lacks insurance. And we're seeing that among the people who are eligible for heavily subsidized coverage on marketplaces, Affordable Care Act, many of them are not taking up coverage. Marketplaces, many of them are not taking up coverage. And our study provides some evidence in why that might be, which it was for the lowest income people in Massachusetts, which it was for many of them took up. In fact, about 95% of them bought insurance. Many of them took up. In fact, about 95% of them bought insurance. Required families to pay more for insurance. That the state required $40 a month to pay more for insurance. Extra $40 a month might have otherwise been covered 25% from buying of the people who might have otherwise been covered. They were remaining uninsured from buying insurance, and therefore adding to the uninsured population, and therefore adding to the uninsured population.
So did it skew toward the younger and healthier people in Massachusetts who decided that the cost was not worth it and they'd rather pay the fine? Because that, I think, is what happened nationally with Obamacare, and that's exactly why the premiums for everybody else went up. If the population in the system was older and sicker, then obviously it costs more to insure them and still leave a profit for the insurance companies.
That's exactly what we found in this study. That's exactly right. That's exactly what we found in this study. How much we could measure how left costly when how much care were using. People who left, we found that they tended to be younger and healthier. Were using. So we found that they tended to be younger and healthier. Sort of the enrollee on average was deterred from buying coverage. The enrollee was deterred from a third to half because of higher premiums was the average. A third to half who remained in the marketplace as the average. So that has implications who remained in the cost of coverage. So that has implications to the government cost of coverage. You're covering a fundamentally health insurers and to the government cost population. You're covering a fundamentally sicker, higher cost population when you charge more for insurance.
So the progressives will say the solution to this is single payer. The conservatives will say the solution is let the market work, let those younger, healthier people buy policies that cover less so they'll be cheaper, so then their money will be going into the system and that'll make it cheaper in turn for the older, sicker people. But there's a third group that doesn't get much press, and those are the people who sort of like Obamacare the way it is and say it could be saved if only there were stiffer penalties for not buying insurance. And I wonder if the penalties were stiff enough in Massachusetts to deter people from opting out of the system, and whether you studied that and whether there are implications of
well, that was one of the surprising things in our results Well, that was one of the surprising things in our results. To a penalty for all of the people who we studied were subject to a penalty for being uninsured. Despite the fact that they would have to pay money at the end of the year on their tax bill, they would have to pay money at the end of the year on their tax bill. If they all of the results didn't obtain insurance, we were finding that less than half the results that we found people eligible for subsidies less than half insurance when they were eligible for something like $120 buying insurance when they were asked to pay something like $120 a month. Despite the fact that if they stayed uninsured, they would have to pay a penalty. Despite the fact that if they stayed uninsured, they would have to pay a penalty. The penalties, while they were there, the reason that might be is that the penalties, while they were there, weren't too high. They were tended to be about half that cost, $60 a month. For that same population I just mentioned, about $60 sometimes to get exemptions from the penalty. And even then, it was possible sometimes to get exemptions from the penalty for other hardship reasons, exemptions, and in particular, if you were uninsured for a short period of time, and in particular, if you were uninsured for a short period of time, and we found that about 40% didn't have to pay a penalty at all. Who would have otherwise found that about 40% didn't end up having to pay anything. Who would have otherwise owed a penalty didn't end up having to pay anything to get to full coverage. The mandate, I think, is probably too weak to get to full coverage.
So what are the implications of this for Trump Care?
So it's really interesting to think about Trump Care. What we found, so it's really interesting to think about Trump Care was that even charging quite modest in Massachusetts was when the government charging quite modest how much it was helping families with insurance. When the government deterred a lot of how much it was helping families with insurance from buying deterred a lot of people now and relatively healthy people from buying Obamacare, colloquially. Now the Affordable Care Act, less generous Obamacare than we had in Massachusetts, provides even less generous subsidies than we had in Massachusetts under Romney buying insurance. And commensurately, we would expect there to be fewer people buying insurance. The proposals under the American Health Care Act have much less proposals under the American Health Care Act for lower income, much less generous individuals, particularly for lower income, even the older individuals. So we would expect under even the Affordable Care Act. If our results hold, that if a large majority, if our results hold, that a large majority, maybe even almost all, unaffordable to buy insurance people under subsidies unaffordable to buy insurance proposed under the American Health Care Act, as they're currently proposed under the American Health Care Act.
Interesting results. We'll see if the Senate, if they ever get back to business after the scandals, takes it seriously. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that's POTUS 2017 for today. We're here each week at this hour. How shall we put it this week? Riding the White House roller coaster while pouring cold, hard facts on the overheated political rhetoric. I'm Brian Lehrer. Thanks for riding with us.